She had a wonderful sense of humour and a fantastic laugh. I miss that laughter. It penetrated everything.
None other has come close to matching the life of Diana, Princess of Wales. An icon of unprecedented magnitude, adored by millions. She was the most famous woman in the world.
I'd like to dispel the myth that she spent all these years crying her eyes out in Kensington Palace behind closed doors. She spent a lot of the time laughing.
She was a lovely, warm person.
I remember someone who questioned a lot, who had funny answers, said funny things, loved dirty jokes, sent me some appallingly risque cards.
It's a penalty of the job that
Yes.
you can't behave as you used to.
I think that's probably just as well, if you knew how I used to behave.
Diana's transformation from princess and wife to dazzling international star and cultural legend played out in the unremitting scrutiny of the public eye.
Did you get the idea that it was becoming an enormous success so that you could enjoy it?
Enjoy something like that? Oh, God. It's terrifying. Such a long walk up that aisle for a start. No, I'm only teasing. Am I?
But when you came out, when you came out, what did you say?
You really want to know that?
Diana revived the popularity of the royal family in the face of modern challenges. For 17 years, her luminous but troubled life transfixed millions.
She took her marriage into the royal family seriously and treated it as a job.
I feel my role is supporting my husband whenever I can and always being behind him, encouraging, and also, most important thing, being a mother and a wife.
She loved them to bits.
Diana's magnetism endeared her to those she met. She connected with the public in a way that was unique and extraordinary.
Diana was a complete one-off, irrespective of the engagement. There were hundreds and often thousands of people. And then you have to make the question, well, why did that happen? You know, why was she so popular?
It's just so beautiful. I'm just so privileged. I can't believe I did that.
What a welcome, they said. And indeed it was.
She seemed like a single figure tackling this huge establishment.
She never gave up. She had a very strong attitude.
She empowered women, and I think that was really important to her.
A lot of women have not so great marriages, and they could identify with her.
She was a brilliant communicator. She really connected with people. That's why people loved her so much.
She transformed our royal family.
The irony about Diana is that she failed to realise was how many people admired her. It told you a lot about her modesty and her sort of lack of confidence in her own ability.
As a parent, could I ask you to respect my children's space? Because I brought the children out here for a holiday.
Right.
And we'd really appreciate the space.
Books, stories, anything to do with Diana that was remotely salacious sold.
It was intimidating, and she found it extremely tough.
At the time, self-esteem was very low, and I felt it important to give what she wanted, to feel a whole woman in every sense.
Yes, I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him. But I was very let down.
Badly let down is an understatement. All she wanted to do was buy back her letters. And he was an absolute
On more than one occasion, she said to me, "This is the woman who wants my job. She wants to be the new me." And she was absolutely right.
Diana, Princess of Wales, became an international obsession, the star of a compelling real-life soap opera that captivated a global audience.
Khan was interesting because he mended people's hearts, and she was a girl with a broken heart. You know, he was a heart surgeon.
Sometimes I felt like screaming.
She then meets Dodi Fayed within a 7-week period under the protection of his security team. She's dead.
Her life was brief, but Diana, Princess of Wales, left her mark. She captivated the world and shook the British monarchy to its core. In the decades that followed, our fascination with the people's princess has not dimmed. Diana remains an irresistible and unforgettable paradox.
There has been a campaign to diminish her memory. There's been lots of efforts to shove Diana to the sidelines of royal history.
Mark Bolland was called in by the Prince of Wales. He was a past assistant private secretary of the Prince, brought in simply to promote the very existence of Camilla. And in a process, knowingly or otherwise, was airbrushing Diana at that stage almost out of existence.
There have been those in the media in particular who have done their best to try and eradicate Diana's memory, but she's resisting. From beyond the grave, 20 years on, she's still a powerful figure, a powerful draw for many people.
Everybody within the royal family, for ease of transition of Camilla, would have preferred everybody not to talk about Diana, in a way of saying, look, she's had her time, she's now dead, sorry, but let's move on. That was never going to happen.
There will never be another Diana, ever.
We were all robbed of someone very special.
Diana did an amazing job for the royal family. I mean, she very nearly brought it to its knees in the end.
She was perceived to be a danger to the monarchy. As it turned out, of course, she was its saviour.
The Honourable Diana Frances Spencer was born into a life of privilege and tradition. Her parents were distinguished members of the English aristocracy.
The ancestry of the Spencers was, of course, goes back into the mists of time, but is very closely associated with the royal family over a number of years.
She came from a family that was very much bound up in the royal family. They'd worked for the royal family. They therefore understood the protocols.
Her father was an equerry to the Queen. They lived on a house on the Sandringham estate.
Both her grandmothers and 4 of her great-aunts were ladies-in-waiting to the Queen Mother.
The two families knew one another quite well.
Presently, a guard of honour of Royal Scots Greys made an arch of swords for Viscount Althorp and his bride as they came out. It was indeed a brilliant occasion and likely to be remembered as the wedding of the year.
On the 1st of July, 1961, the Honourable Diana Frances Spencer was born at Park House on the Sandringham estate, in the same room in which her mother, Frances, had been born. No one could have predicted the impact she would have, not just upon the royal family, but throughout the world.
I mean, she used to like to dance, and she was very fond of swimming. She was always up and down to the swimming pool. She danced in the main hall and played the piano. No, she never ever said what she wanted to do. The only time I ever heard her say anything was just in fun. At her sister's wedding, she said, my wedding will be at Westminster Abbey. And she was 18 then, I should think. But we always thought she'd be Prince Andrew.
The secure calm of Diana's childhood was shattered at an early stage. In 1967, her parents' marriage ended in separation.
Diana had a very difficult childhood.
Her parents were constantly at loggerheads, enormous rows.
Her mother was in an abusive marriage. She gave her husband the children that he wanted. She finally gave him the son he was desperate to have, the son and heir. And she then saw an opportunity to have a happy life herself. She fell in love with somebody and she went off with him, fully believing that she would take her children with her.
She didn't know Diana. She left the house when she was 6. She wasn't interested in her children.
Francis's decision to separate from Diana's father, I think that cast a shadow over Diana's entire life, framed very much her own marriage too. So that was a constant feature in the background, if you like.
Her mother walked out. She never forgot the sound of her mother's footsteps on the gravel. And her mum said, "Oh, I'll be back in a week." And she never came back.
She understood nothing about the custody proceedings. All she knew was that her mother didn't love her enough to want to be with her. In the early 60s, it was practically unheard of for a mother not to get custody of her children. But what happened was, in the custody proceedings, her mother gave evidence against her.
Frances was criticised and almost demonised.
Her mother was Ruth Lady Fermoy, who was a lady-in-waiting to the Queen Mother, and she was a terrible snob, and she thoroughly disapproved of her daughter leaving her Earl and taking up with a man in trade. And she gave evidence against her daughter. She said that she was a bad mother, and as a result of that, Frances Shand Kidd, as she became, lost custody of all 4 of her children.
Lord Spencer, you know, did bring his children up, obviously with the assistance of nannies, and Diana still had access to her mother.
Diana was very close to her father. Unfortunately, her mother saw Diana as a rival.
Like all domestic relationships within families, there are various dynamics going on. Frances was a sort of an older version of Diana.
Tall, elegant, lovely lady.
Very stubborn, very determined, very single-minded. And there was friction between the two of them, there is no doubt about it.
In reality, Frances, her mother, was probably the best friend that she had.
At one stage, there is no doubt that Diana and Frances, her mother, were extremely close. She was her closest confidant in the early years of the marriage.
I was there one day and she was on the phone to her mother, and they were arguing, and, you know, her mother actually said, you know, "Diana, I'm the one that should have been the star."
The tragedy for Diana and for Frances was that at the time of Diana's death, they were not on speaking terms. They had been for many years, but earlier that year in 1997, they had a very bad falling out, and for those last few months, they didn't talk.
Whatever happened to the very end of Diana's life and the relationship, I think it sort of fails into oblivion, given, you know, the very closeness that they endured, certainly through the time that I was there.
Upon the death of her grandfather in 1975, Diana's father became the 8th Earl Spencer and inherited Althorpe. Like her sisters and brother, she assumed a title and became Lady Diana Spencer.
Somehow the fact that Diana was the daughter of an aristocrat and came from a very privileged background didn't matter. We took her as sort of one of our own. We thought she was the ordinary girl next door.
At the age of 9, Diana Spencer was sent to Riddlesworth Hall. In 1974, she followed her elder sisters, Sarah and Jane, to Westheath School in Kent.
I would describe it as a huge family, lots of laughter. The girls, a lot of them were titled, but the staff never knew which girls were titled, so everyone was treated as equals. Diana was a very likeable character and a very helpful person. She was a very easy person to chat with even at that age. In fact, after the class we used to have break, and instead of going off for break, she would want to stay behind and chat and just generally want to know about our lives. She was a brilliant swimmer and won many awards for the school. Diana was very, very keen on her dancing, but mainly the ballet. And actually there were only 2 girls in the class, so it was very special, almost one-on-one teaching.
I actually wanted to be a dancer, but I overshot the height by a long way. I couldn't imagine some man trying to lift me up above his arms, but I do it once a week if I can, and it's a combination of tap, jazz and ballet. And I really enjoy it enormously.
She was an outstanding dancer, so enthusiastic. I know she used to practice every morning in the main hall before I would arrive. She was very dedicated and an absolute joy to teach.
She wanted to be a ballet dancer herself, but she grew too tall.
By then, obviously, she couldn't take that path.
Nevertheless, she kept up her ballet movements throughout her life. Sometimes she would even go to rehearsals and join in with the English National Ballet.
It was wonderful for her because she was able to pop along and walk in on rehearsals.
She adored going to Covent Garden and seeing the performances on stage, and of course, famously, she did it once herself with Wayne Sleep.
When she danced with Wayne Sleep, I was immensely proud that she managed to do that.
It was one of the wedding presents which slightly backfired. She did it as a tribute to Charles, and it was filmed, and Charles wasn't terribly impressed because he thought she was showing off, but in fact it was incredibly courageous of her to go on stage, you know, at the home of English ballet at Covent Garden, and to do a routine with the great Wayne Sleep. Took an awful lot of courage. I thought she looked fantastic.
Although Diana Spencer's academic path was undistinguished, outside of the classroom, she had a keen love of music.
Her passion was music. It wasn't Duran Duran or Boy George or Wham. I mean, she liked pop music, but her real passion was for classical music. The thing I remember about her is driving around in her car, listening to music like bands like Supertramp on the one hand, and then going on to something very classical on the next. She was a great fan of opera, and she travelled over to Italy on several occasions to see Pavarotti.
I'm a great believer in having music wherever I go, whether it's a headset or a radio or a record player, and it's just a big treat to go out for a walk with music still coming out with me. And I tend to listen to an enormous amount of classical music, whether it's Grieg, Rachmaninoff or Schumann, and all my family, my side of the family, are very music orientated, and that's where I picked it up from. I love it.
And you still play the piano?
Yes, I play that. It's nothing to get excited about by any means, but I really enjoy it. It's very therapeutic.
Diana connected effortlessly with people. Her human touch endeared her to those she met.
As Princess of Wales, she made a joke of her school days and her lack of academic success. On a visit to West Heath 10 years later to open a new sports hall named after her former headmistress, she recalled past misdemeanours and the price she had to pay.
She said, "Oh, Wendy, I returned to the school, but I was surprised because a lot of the staff were nervous of me, and I'm just Diana."
My years at West Heath were certainly very happy ones indeed. I made many friends who I often see, and in spite of what Miss Rudge and my other teachers may have thought at the time, I did actually learn something. So you would never have known by my O-level results.
Diana was much more intelligent than people ever gave her credit for. She wasn't academic. Look, make no mistake, she didn't excel brilliantly at school and pass lots of exams. That was not her.
She herself admitted that she didn't have a great clutch of O-levels, and would occasionally refer to herself as being the thickest member of the royal family.
Diana was actually one of the most intelligent women anyone could ever meet. She pretended to be a dimwit. Diana knew exactly what was going on in politics, economics. She was very, very savvy.
She was well informed. She would talk about politics. She was interested in current affairs.
She used to say to me, "You know, they always talk over my head because they think I'm a spimbo, but I know what they're talking about."
She was a bright girl.
It was a sort of wicked sense of humour that really stood her out from other members of the royal family.
Oh, what's that? Is that a present?
She would be able to say something on the spur of the moment which would be quite humorous or witty.
She certainly liked a joke. She had particular targets of her jokes. At Kensington Palace, poor old Princess Michael of Kent, who was her closest neighbour, often was on the receiving end.
She liked to play jokes on people and tease people, but not in a bad way, just in a fun-loving way. I bought her an outfit to wear, which was a thong. And thongs were just sort of coming into the fitness world fashion. And she was very happy to wear it.
Diana raced out in very revealing gym kit and surprised Princess Michael as she and a whole bunch of rather stuffy friends were going off to the races.
She wanted to embarrass them, which I think she did achieve.
She was with her friend Simone Simmons and they were covered in some sort of avocado makeup. They were doing a sort of deep cleanse on their face and they thrust their faces together out of the window looking like a pair of Martians as Princess Michael was again about to get into a grand car to go off somewhere important.
I went there one day and I was waiting downstairs in the formal interview room, and while I was sitting there, there's a beautiful cat that came through, and when Diana walked in she said, "Oh my God, you like cats?" I said, "Well, you know I do." She said, "Oh, I forget, you've got 3. Yes. She said, "Would you like another one?" I said, "I don't mind." She said, "Well, this cat's very, very unhappy living with Princess Michael, as is everybody else that lives there. So would you please take her home with you?" I said, "I'd love to." She said, "Paul, go and get a box." So he went and got a box and said, "Do you know the cat's been chipped? Microchipped?" And Diana said, "Wouldn't it be funny if we both ended up in prison?"
In the early years, she was friendly with Princess Michael, but things changed.
They didn't get on as well. They perhaps should have done.
She didn't like Princess Michael of Kent, and the feeling was mutual.
She had a wonderful sense of humour. You wanted to laugh anyway. Whatever the joke was, you laughed because of her.
And the princess found it hard to suppress a girlish attack of giggles on seeing her husband in a hard hat.
She was funny, witty, and big-hearted.
She teased her policemen, she teased her friends, she teased other members of the Kensington Palace staff.
When the cameras were off, then it was playtime. I remember coming back from New York, and we'd arrived at Heathrow, and she said, "Oh, you must ring up my hairdresser." I said, "Well, what do I want to ring up his hairdresser for?" And she said, "Oh, just ring him up, just do one of your funny voices." And I remember ringing him up. He had a salon in Claridge's, and I'm on the sort of hands-free in the car. I rang up and I said, "Hey, Richard," I said, "this is Jack Weisner from the New York Times. We just want to talk about Diana's hairstyle." And Richard, in a very effeminate voice, said, he said, "I don't give interviews." He said, "Well, this is not an interview. We just want to know, when did you last do Diana's hair?" "I'm not talking about her hair." "Well, Richard, let me tell you something. When did you last do her roots?" At which point, Diana and her sister were in the back. I could see Diana sort of stuffing tissues in her mouth, and the chauffeur wasn't actually losing control exactly. But I decided to call it a day. I said, "It's all right, Richard, it's Ken." I won't say what he said.
In 1977, Lady Diana attended the Institut Alpin Videmanette in Switzerland.
After Westheath, she went to Switzerland for 2 terms, where she went to a finishing school.
With money inherited on her 18th birthday, Diana bought a flat in London, which would be her home until the day her engagement was announced. For a while, she worked as a kindergarten teacher.
I wanted to teach children, and they said, "Why not come along?" So I first started off doing afternoons, and then I took over the mornings and did whole days. But I only worked 3 days a week at kindergarten, and the other 2 I looked after American baby boy.
It was 1977 when the world's most eligible bachelor and heir to the British throne encountered his future princess.
It was 1977. Charles came to stay as a friend of my sister Seward for a shoot. We sort of met in a ploughed field.
I remember thinking what a very jolly and amusing and attractive 16-year-old she was.
That marriage came about in a strange way. It came about through granny power.
At that particular time, working for the Queen Mother was a lady called Ruth Fermoy, a lady who was Diana's grandmother, who was very instrumental with the Queen Mother, in bringing together this relationship. You could say with some degree of certainty that this was the last of any royal arranged marriage.
Prince Charles was under intense pressure to find a future queen. Diana fitted the bill perfectly.
Is there any possibility of any announcement of your marriage in the near future? Can you tell me? Can you tell me if there's any possibility?
I'm not going to say anything, I'm afraid.
Right, but Prince Charles did give us a hint himself. He said we wouldn't have to wait too long.
Lady Diana Spencer, well, as the Queen said, she's one of us.
She knew all the ropes and all the rules. She seemed, in a sense, to be ideal.
Actually, she was on the scene and familiar to the Queen and Prince Philip, who were both very fond of her.
She touched his heart, and that was the beginning of the relationship.
Life for Diana changed instantly, and she was bombarded with press the whole time. And I think she coped with it admirably, and she was very gracious, but I know that she wasn't really happy about it.
Will you be back at all?
Her flat in London became absolutely besieged by the press, by photographers. They followed her everywhere she went. And that was effectively the end of Charles and Diana being able to explore their relationship, get to know one another. They scarcely knew one another at that point.
On February the 24th, 1981, the royal engagement became official.
When she met him, she was very young, and he's obviously very charming, and she was swept off her feet by him.
They were, for a time, really completely a dream team.
There was love between Charles and Diana at one stage.
She never stopped loving Charles. And right to the very end, she loved him.
Diana was genuinely in love with the Prince of Wales. Well, she told me she was, and I have no reason to disbelieve her, but I'm not so certain about the Prince.
They liked the same things, they had the same interests: complementary medicine, organic foods, organic farming, you know, natural, you know, going back to basics. They both had a brilliant sense of humour.
When they became engaged, they still scarcely knew one another. That was the real tragedy of the whole thing.
If 6 years later, if they would have got married, they'd never have got divorced. Unfortunately, she was too young.
When Charles met Diana, he wasn't really free emotionally to give himself to her as she gave herself to him.
Camilla was in the way, and Camilla was always intent on being queen.
Prince Charles, of course, as we since discovered, was already committed emotionally to another woman.
The whole Camilla thing was an ongoing plague in Diana's life, really.
She recognised very early on that this was not going to be a bed of roses.
Yesterday you were a nanny. One day you would, in all likelihood, be queen. It's a tremendous change for someone, if I may say, of 19 to make all of a sudden.
It is, but I've had a small run up to it all in the last 6 months. And next to Prince Charles, I know I can't go wrong. He's there with me.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
We all laughed, or a lot of people did, but I actually believe it was actually being honest.
He was involved with Camilla right the way through the engagement. Famously, she gave him cufflinks and little tokens of love that he actually took on his honeymoon with Diana.
In arranged marriages in the past, you know, it was accepted that the Prince of Wales and so forth had mistresses, but Diana was not prepared to go down that line. And so the marriage really got off to a bad start. People talk about their divorce, their relationship as being very complex. It wasn't very complex at all. I mean, here was a relationship, like any other relationship, where one of the parties is having an adulterous affair.
To the captivated public, Lady Diana appeared to be the perfect candidate to fill the position of Princess of Wales.
Why have you come here today?
To try and get a glimpse of Diana and Charles.
Why are you so pleased?
Because I think she's just the right person for him.
Admired and emulated for her beauty, Diana's wardrobe became a continual focus of attention.
When I first arrived, there were a lot of people to help me, and it's now really my own choice. But I can't always wear what I'd like to on engagement because it's just not practical. You'd be amazed what one has to worry about, from the obvious things like the wind. There's always a gale wherever we go, and the wind is my enemy, there's no doubt about that. And you've got to put your arm up to get some flowers, so you can't have something too revealing, and you can't have hems too short because when you bend over there's 6 children looking at your skirt, and it goes on like that. You've got to be, clothes are for the job. You've got to be practical, and sometimes I can be a little outrageous, which is quite nice, sometimes.
She was a very striking woman, very physically striking.
She almost had a sort of model figure. She was very tall and she was very slim.
She had such a beautiful posture and poise.
She had the most amazing, flawless skin.
The thing I remember about her is not the glossy performing Diana on the public stage, but the Diana whose hair, when it wasn't all done up and teased up by her hairdressers, was quite flat, and minimum makeup, jeans, terribly tall of course.
She looked really amazing when she was in jeans and t-shirt and no makeup.
I don't think she really knew how beautiful she was, and she was actually naturally very beautiful. I'd seen her first thing in the morning with no makeup, just straight out of the shower, and she had the most amazing skin.
She was just extremely photogenic.
At school, you wouldn't have thought that Diana would have become a fashion model.
I think she just didn't take a bad pick. I really enjoy looking at pictures of her.
I don't like her in white as much, I must admit.
One of her first dresses she wore for a public engagement was that black taffeta Emanuel dress, and the papers the next day said plunging necklines. It was a big scandal.
The black dress was, we always called it our transformation dress. There was the plunge element. It caused quite a stir.
So there was a bit of a hoo-ha about her décolletage.
When she wore the black dress, it was the first time anybody had seen her in grown-up kind of clothes. And before then, she'd been wearing sort of very quite romantic styles with frills and flounces. When she turned out wearing that, it was a transformation of a young girl into a princess to be.
There were very few other times she wore black, and it is something normally sort of reserved for mourning.
Once she wore the black dress, she noticed the press was paying a lot of attention to her and realised that what she wore had an impact. We weren't really surprised that it fetched such a large price. It was a very famous dress, and that's why it raised such a lot of money.
Selling now for $160,000 plus buyer's premium, $160,000. Sold. Thank you very much. It was probably the most exciting auction of my entire 30-year career.
On the day the royal engagement was announced, the future Princess of Wales moved to the Queen Mother's London residence, Clarence House, and thereafter to Buckingham Palace.
Diana was just thrown in at the deep end. She went to live in Buckingham Palace.
She felt a little isolated and a little unsure of her position.
She was so young, she was only 19. She felt she couldn't really have her friends around to such a sort of scary place.
She moved from her lovely, giggly flat with her flatmates into Buckingham Palace, which is very, very different. It was a complete shock to her.
Did you watch TV a lot? Did you have any favourite programmes?
Oh, God. Crossroads.
Did you share that like?
Unfortunately, yes.
Out of the blue, one day came a letter from the palace, and inside was a letter from Diana asking me if I remembered her at Westheath, and saying because of her situation, she had just become engaged to Prince Giles, that she couldn't get out mainly because of the press around, and would I consider going to Buckingham Palace to teach her. And we had a wonderful time. It's such happy memories. I used to go to Buckingham Palace 3 times a week. She was very happy. She came across as being very much in love. She was quite tired, as any bride is, with the preparations going on, but I think even more so because there were many dress fittings and then practices of getting into the coach and out of the coach.
All the fittings were at our studio. We had everybody trying to find out what we were going to be doing. They even sort of located themselves in the flats opposite us so they could try and film through our windows. We were making the bridesmaid dresses, and that was a lot of fun as well, particularly because Diana used to bring them in for fittings, and one time they were all wearing roller skates.
It was a very busy time, but very happy time as well.
Diana was really happy, and we were happy, and it was very, very exciting. And the final fitting was in Buckingham Palace, because our studio was too small to spread out the train, because I mean that was really long.
Prince Charles was away travelling a lot. She thought it was all going to be wonderfully romantic and they'd be having candlelit suppers in Buckingham Palace and he would sort of whisk her away on a white charger, but it wasn't like that at all. She hardly saw him. I don't think anyone actually explained to her the enormity of what she was doing.
She just thought it would be lovely to be a princess.
What is royalty about? Royalty is a mixture of myth and reality. It's the fairy tale romance of a princess coming together with living history.
She lived in a kind of romantic world. She read Barbara Cartland romantic novels. She simply thought royal life would be like something out of a romantic novel. She would marry the prince she loved. She would be secure and safe. And I don't think she really understood what it would involve.
Amid economic gloom and an unpopular government, the British people were offered what they have never failed to rejoice over, a happy royal event.
We'd been through some very tough times. There was a recession in Britain, and also we just had a series of riots in Brixton and in Liverpool, and suddenly the royal wedding happened. It was high summer and London was on fete.
Everybody felt very happy and elated by it.
I was reporting on the royal wedding for the Mail back then. I remember being out the night before, talking and interviewing to lots of the people who were camping out on the street all the way from Buckingham Palace to St Paul's Cathedral.
As dawn came up over London, preparations for the parade were well advanced. Horses were made to get up early. Outside Buckingham Palace and all the way to St Paul's, the pavements were jammed with well-wishers.
On the 29th of July, 1981, Lady Diana Spencer's life would change forever.
Though still a commoner, the pretty English girl will be transformed into the third lady of the realm, Princess of Wales.
We were all waiting on the steps and it was all very quiet, and it kind of finally sunk in that this is it. We hope everybody likes the dress.
And the wedding dress that has been a carefully guarded secret. Resplendent ivory silk taffeta, trimmed with antique lace and a long, long train, all 25 feet hand-embroidered. As bewitching and romantic a bride as ever touched the heart of the world.
I thought it was exquisite, so beautiful.
One of the sort of outstanding things that people seem to remember is this really, really, really terribly long train.
But that long train is a bridesmaid's nightmare.
We noticed that there was some wrinkles there in the dress, and my heart must have hit my knees. We knew the taffeta does tend to wrinkle, but we also knew it pulled out because it was quite a heavy taffeta.
It took quite a while to arrange her when she came out of the carriage to make it sort of look right.
It was kind of romantic, dramatic, theatrical. The dress was made of silk taffeta and we had it specially woven. There was a lot of fabric. The amount of tulle that we used for the petticoat must have been hundreds of meters. And there was many thousands of pearls and sequins embroidered onto the lace. There was a lot of work on that dress.
I had an end chair in the aisle, and obviously I was looking back to see Diana coming. And I'm sure for her it must have been very overwhelming with all these people around, but she was beaming, looking radiant. And our eyes caught each other and her face lit, and I lifted my head a little and she did. And I was really proud of her.
Her bouquet, orchids and pale gardenias, dark myrtle and golden Mountbatten roses.
Diana never appeared nervous at all. I don't think we ever saw her nervous. I was nervous.
So Charles and Diana come together before God and the world to make their vows. each to the other.
Diana Francis, wilt thou have this man to thy wedded husband, to live together according to God's law in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love him, comfort him, honor and keep him in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto him, so long as ye both shall live?
I will.
Who can doubt the love and happiness that this couple so obviously feel and share? So strong that for one inspiring day, a whole nation can forget its troubles to unite in wishing them well. All the best fairy stories end with the words, "And they all lived happily ever after." May we pray that this fairy story is no exception.
One thing I do remember was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Runcie, saying, "This is what fairy tales are made of."
It's a wonderful and special day, full of hope. It quickly went wrong.
Although it was a fairy tale, it had an incredibly unhappy ending in so many different ways.
On Diana's wedding day, she said her initial instinct, because that's when she found out about Camilla, her initial instinct was to turn and run. Her family wouldn't let her do it.
Behind the newlyweds comes the Queen, accompanied by the Earl Spencer.
Prince Charles couldn't let go of his mistress, and the tragedy unfolded.
The Camilla issue was clearly in open court. You know, really, how do you sort of reel back from that? It was a difficult one.
Did you marry the right man?
Well, a full name is quite something to get organised.
And have you really endowed your wife with all your worldly goods?
What did I say? Did I say some of my worldly goods?
Amid scenes of national joy and celebration, the public obsession with Princess Diana began.
How are you enjoying married life?
Highly recommend.
She was an event. Wherever she went, her presence connected with the great British public. They loved her. She wasn't some sort of staid fuddy-duddy out the House of Windsor. She was a breath of fresh air. She was glamorous. She brought a film star quality.
The people of York turned out in their tens of thousands on a sunny morning. And in what's become an instant tradition, there were gifts and flowers by the basketful.
Diana had glamour, plus the status. Now, Hollywood movie stars have got glamour. They haven't got the status that you get from being a future queen. And so Diana was unique.
Her style, her involvement, her approach, her attitude, her fun, her sense of humour, endeared her to the public.
Whoever associated a sense of humour with the royal family before until she came along? She had a natural way of greeting people and making you really believe that she was genuinely interested in you.
She made you feel important. She was just wonderful.
She was immensely popular in a way that is very hard to imagine now.
I don't think she had any concept of just how popular she was. If she went on these tours, she assumed that people will sort of bust in to see her. I said, no, people come to see because they want to see you. These aren't sort of one-party states where people are forced to come pay homage to you.
After she died, I actually thought, if she only knew.
As her celebrity flourished, Diana rapidly learned how to make an impact.
The clothes were kind of a language for her, and you could see how she was feeling or what message she was trying to get across simply by looking at what she was wearing.
You could always tell if it was going to be a good day with Diana or a bad day. If it was a good day, she'd arrive wearing pink or red. That meant she was in a rosy mood. She had her rosy specs on, sort of metaphorically, and she'd cooperate. But if you turned up at a job and she was wearing black, you'd think, oh God. She'd keep her back turned to us all day. She was very clever at handling the press, and getting across the message that she wanted us to publicise for her.
She didn't send sort of big trends, but she picked out particular pieces and then other people would wear them.
As she got more and more confident in her own style, she would push the boundaries a bit.
For a while she was also very much into sort of military style, so she had a lot of Cossack coats and things with frogging. For Diana, her hair was a big thing as well, it wasn't just what she was wearing. When they went to New Zealand, they were confronted by 5 or 6 women all having the same hairstyles and by crossed blouses.
My clothes are not my priority. I enjoy bright colours and my husband likes to see me look smart, presentable. And I do think there's too much emphasis on my clothes. I mean, fashion isn't my big thing at all.
The royal couple seemed an almost perfect match. For a while, the idyll continued to bewitch an unsuspecting public. Even the couple's dissimilar interests seemed captivating.
I was lucky enough to marry her, and we had many messages. It's amazing what ladies do when your back's turned.
Do your tastes coincide?
On what?
Pop music.
Well, yes, sometimes, yes. Not always. I mean, some I don't, and you don't necessarily with mine.
Well, I've got a reputation for liking all the people we go to concerts with, but we go and hopefully it's going to raise money for my husband's charities. But we're great, both of us love classical music and the opera and the ballet and go whenever we can to see it.
Charles came back one day, and normally if Charles came home we'd have to sort of disappear while he came in and got settled. But on one occasion she said, no, we're going to go and meet him on the stairs. We both had our exercise kit on and met him on the stairs. I think that was her way of trying to embarrass him. But he handled the situation very well. Was most gracious.
The People's Princess expertly updated ancient royal traditions. Unlike other royals, her attitude was open and friendly.
Diana was unique in the sense that she would never refer to you by your last name, which tended to be the norm with other members of the royal family.
I mean, seeing royalty that close up, I mean, they'd actually, take the time out to come and talk to us. It's just unbelievable. God, it was great. I used the whole roll of film. It was worth it, I swear.
The people who loved her were the staff. I've not found one royal servant who didn't love her.
She was not publicly acknowledged by other members of the royal family at the time for steering the royal family into the 21st century.
There was some criticism about how much attention she was able to draw to herself.
Part of the problem was that they were jealous of her popularity. I worked with the Duke of Kent. When I went with him on a number of engagements throughout the United Kingdom and throughout the world, very few people, if any, would ever turn up. And he would jokingly say to me, he said, well, nobody knows who I am, so nobody come here. They did with you when you were working with Diana. It was this popularity that I think was the problem.
Diana represented her country with such panache that the Prince of Wales began to look like the junior partner in the royal enterprise.
I haven't yet worked out a method of splitting my wife in half.
She ended up eclipsing Prince Charles, which can't have been his intention. He wanted to have the limelight too, and it wasn't to be.
He felt that he had really important things to say, messages to deliver in speeches. And of course he would make speeches, and he would have Diana by his side, and the press ignored his speeches, and they talked about Diana's hairstyle or her clothes, and Charles found that incredibly frustrating.
I've come to the conclusion that really it would have been far easier to have had 2 wives. To have covered both sides of the street. And I could have walked down the middle, directing the operation.
Charles jealous? He doesn't know what jealousy is.
In June 1982, just 10 days after her 21st birthday, Princess Diana gave birth to a son.
It's rather a grown-up thing, I found.
William Arthur Philip Louis Mountbatten Windsor became heir to the throne with the title Prince William of Wales.
Let's see. Look.
She was incredibly devoted to being a mother and a wife.
She was a fantastic mum. I mean, no one can take that away from her.
The princess found new happiness when her second son, Henry Charles Albert David, was born in 1984. He assumed the title Prince Henry of Wales, but the princess announced that he would be called Harry.
Okay, here we go. That's fine. And
look over there.
She did smother those boys with love and affection, but never over the top.
They love the mother. I witnessed that over many, many years. From day one, when William went to school in '86, unless there was an engagement out of London or that took her abroad, she would take William to school and be there when they arrived home in the afternoon.
She wanted to give them a very normal upbringing, even though their circumstances weren't particularly normal.
She did things with them that other royals didn't do. For example, she took William and Harry out, took them on the London Underground, took them on London buses, on London taxis. The Prince of Wales had a problem with this. Why do you want to take them on a bus? Why do you want to take them on a taxi? Couldn't see that. I can understand him saying it, but this was her way of saying, look, this is what is out there.
She let them see the difference between the privileged and underprivileged.
He would say, why do you take them to a burger bar? We've got a perfectly good chef. A good question, and an understanding question, but it wasn't about that. It was about Diana and the way that she felt that her children at that particular age should be educated, where all their friends were doing all these things on a daily basis.
There's always this myth that William, being who he is, hardly ever sees a child, but I have two sisters that have 5 children between them, and I have lots of friends who have children as well, so we get around. He just adores other children and very much an organiser, which probably might be helpful in future years.
It's because of Diana that William is the young man that he is today. He's much more relaxed, not nearly as buttoned up as his father. He has many of those Spencer genes in him. Harry has them even more.
Court life presented a challenge for Diana. Her free-spirited nature clashed with the protocol set by the royal household.
Did you know what you were taking on and not being able to just walk down the street?
No, I didn't.
Diana sort of strove for what she would often refer to, I want to be normal. But of course, for a lot of members of the royal family, it's almost impossible to be normal. But I think Diana got close.
It's wonderful that she could go out in disguise. One time she was experimenting, and this person answered the door to me, walked me up the stairs, and, in her small lounge, that William and Harry were there. And she said, the princess will see you now. And the boys just could not stop laughing. And she said, I fooled you, didn't I? Said, oh my God.
Does it get complicated? You can't go shopping now, can you, as you were able to do before you were engaged?
No, certainly not, and nor do I have the time in which to do it. But it helps me to see what's around, not necessarily clothes, but books, all sorts of things. And it's just nice to just keep in touch with everybody, or go out shopping with a girlfriend who wants to buy something and wants me to come along.
In spite of the media, putting her in the spotlight, she put on her wig, wore what she wanted, came for walks on Hampstead Heath, went to the charity shop with me in Camden High Street.
She was a very striking woman, very physically striking, and you didn't forget Diana if you saw her in the street. She did her best to disguise herself, the old baseball cap. And on this one occasion, we were walking on the Heath, and someone goes, hey, is that Diana? And I said, no, I'm her twin sister. Oh, right, okay. And we just carried on walking.
I remember we picked up the Underground train at Hyde Park Corner, travelled on the Underground train at Piccadilly Circus, got off the train at Piccadilly Circus, and people would look and think, is that Diana? No, they wouldn't travel on an Underground. So there was never a security problem.
She was quite disarming with people. I mean, she didn't mind being recognised, although she preferred it if she wasn't.
And we got on the bus. Again, Harry and William scrambling up to the top deck. And I remember even when they had conductors buying a ticket. He didn't know whether to give them a ticket, sell them a ticket, or let them travel away, because he didn't believe for one moment that they were on this bus. Now this, to me, was a good way of educating royal children.
What do you say, Ma'am, when you read in the papers that you are a determined, domineering woman?
I don't always read that. I'm people very willing to tell me that. But I don't think I am. I'm a perfectionist with myself, but not necessarily with everybody else. And those stories arose a long time ago and have kept coming out again and again. But I don't think I am.
You feel hurt by them?
Well, obviously one does. You feel very wounded, and if it comes out, you think, oh gosh, I don't want to go out and do my engagement this morning. Nobody wants to see me. Help, panic. But you've got to push yourself out and remember that some people hopefully won't believe everything they read about you.
Princess Diana was branded as the ultimate manipulator of the media and a self-publicist. But in reality, she promoted her image only for the good of others.
Diana had an intriguing relationship with the media from day one.
She always did that check where the camera is. Okay. She was a professional in that sense.
The media loved Diana. They saw the funny girl who was incredibly helpful, and you know, you go on a tour with Princess Anne and she will not stop to have a photograph taken. She will turn her back on photographers. She will do anything not to be helpful. Diana went out of her way to be helpful, and so everybody fell in love with her.
She was a great worker of the media and a manipulator too. And she'd made, you know, friends and contacts within the media that she worked to her advantage.
I wrote about her almost every day. She became a daily part of my life.
You couldn't have had more coverage. Diana was in the papers every day and often on the front cover.
There's far too much about me in the newspapers. It horrifies me when there's something important, like there's been a bomb or something. They'll put me on the front page.
There is a department within Buckingham Palace that prints out extracts from the papers, so they read it. They either read it, forget it, or read it, or fume over it. Diana knew everything that was printed.
There were clearly things I wrote that she was furious with.
She got upset with Richard Kay, and I said, hold on, Diana, please read it again. Read it out loud to me, what he's written. Not what you think he's written, what he's actually written. And she said, oh, I see what you mean.
They got pictures of me getting in or out of Diana's car. I mean, it was an entirely normal procedure, but it was used by the media at that time, whichever newspaper it was that published them, to sort of attack Diana and to accuse her of hypocrisy, because at the time she was complaining a lot about the intrusion of the media, and there she was sitting in her car with one of the media figures, i.e. me.
What Diana didn't like was when complete untruths were written. You could argue that Diana was going through the early stages of fake news in the 80s and 90s.
There's always so much going on with Diana. There was always another crisis looming or another situation, so she didn't dwell on the past too much.
She did live life in the fast lane. Everything happened very quickly in her life, you know, and it was almost like she was in a hurry to get things done. She always said to me that her life would end abruptly.
She said, you know, Simone, I'm never going to make old bones.
She said, you know, I'm going to go before my time.
At first, all seemed well with the royal marriage. There was little hint of the troubles ahead. After William's birth in 1982, Diana suffered with postnatal depression.
Diana did have difficulties, there's no question. I mean, she certainly suffered from postnatal problems after the birth of Prince William.
There was a little bit postnatal depression.
She suddenly, as far as Charles was concerned, she changed before his very eyes. This lovely, happy-go-lucky, easy, laughing, giggling, funny girl who made everybody else laugh suddenly became angry, jealous, uncooperative, She had terrible mood swings. She manifested a side to herself that nobody had seen before.
All she wanted was a big cuddle and a shoulder to cry on, and unfortunately Charles' upbringing precluded all of that. He didn't know how. He really didn't.
He didn't know how to help. He thought that it was his fault.
You know, she was as emotional as any other woman.
He was a very busy man, totally committed to duty, and just didn't have the capacity, emotional capacity or anything else to deal with Diana.
Things never really improved.
These are entirely natural occurrences which many women suffer from, but coupled with being this most worshipped woman on the planet, it must have all contributed to her well-being.
People like Miller and his inner circle saying, you know, why don't you put her into a psychiatric hospital?
She was totally compos mentis.
And Diana didn't sort of throw herself down royal staircases, you know, to receive attention, because very often there's nobody at the bottom of the steps to receive you anyway.
The Queen stuck in the middle, which was really nothing she'd ever had to deal with before in her life. She really didn't know how to deal with the moral confrontation of this hysterical woman on one hand, and then her son sort of saying on the other hand she's mad.
Absolute. Can I go on record as saying that's rubbish?
She was completely and utterly normal.
She clearly was highly strung. She did things which, on balance, she wouldn't have done if she'd reflected about it. And it is easy to paint her as some kind of nutcase, but personally, I don't think she was.
Maybe on occasion she had little outbursts because she was just genuinely frustrated with the way people were behaving around her.
Certainly some of the people in Charles's circle, they're all yes people. And they didn't know how to deal with somebody that is human, tactile, emotional, that's just had a baby. You know, they're used to people, oh, you've had a baby, you dump the baby with a nanny and carry on. Well, Diana wasn't that sort of person.
She was completely normal. In fact, more normal than probably other people in that family.
I'm supposed to be dragged off in a minute with men in white coats, so if it's all right with you, I thought I might postpone my nervous breakdown to a more appropriate moment.
There was one time she said, I need to do some shopping at Ken High Street. And I said, no. Well, okay, right. She said, well, you can park the car. Now, this was rather strange because that would never be said. Anyway, I said, look, I'm not here to park your car, but I parked it near the Israeli embassy in Kensington High Street. At which point, Diana gets out and ran away up Kensington Palace Gardens, which was unusual. I thought, well, I'm not going to run after you, you know, that's not my game here. Although some would argue maybe I should have done, but I didn't. But I knew that she wanted to buy some CDs from the then Tower Records in Ken Church Street. So I decided that I'd go and wait outside Tower Records, knowing that she didn't have any money. Anyway, she eventually came out, and I gave her the money to pay for the Tower Records, and we got back, and I said, you know, what was all that about? I think it was just a moment of pique.
She wanted her own space. In the end, she dumped her bodyguards.
I think you're very fortunate to have your patron here today. I'm supposed to have my head down the loo for most of the day.
She did tell me that she thought she was bulimic. It was brought about by the disharmony, the unhappiness in her marriage.
It began when she was on honeymoon. She was making herself vomit.
There may well have been an eating disorder in the very early stages of her marriage, but it was certainly nothing on the scale that certain sections of the media actually would have you believe.
At one point I said to Diana, I said, have you looked at yourself lately? She says, what do you mean? I said, well, you turn sideways and you're like an ironing board with boobs. And you've got these pointy shoulders that are becoming lethal weapons. She looked quite shocked. I said, no, it looks horrible. I said, look, you can start counting your ribs back and front. I said, this is not acceptable. She did listen to me. We were in Delance's cafe around the corner in Camden. I said, go on, I said, a little bit of what you fancy does you good. So if you had a cappuccino and she had a chocolate croissant.
When Diana spoke publicly about bulimia, the effect was powerful. It led to a greater public awareness and a better understanding of the condition.
Eating disorders, whether it be anorexia or bulimia, show how an individual can turn the nourishment of the body into a painful attack on themselves.
I don't believe she had an eating disorder. I think, like any young woman, your emotions affect your diet. We all do it. When we're feeling a bit low, we go for the chocolate and all the bad things that we know we're not supposed to eat, or we feel so emotionally strung out that we can't eat. We feel, your stomach is in a knot and you just can't eat anything. And I think that that's what she was going through.
The media have a great way of exaggerating the problem, and I think bulimia was a classic case of that. Because it's good reading.
It was just because of the stress and things that she was having to deal with at the time.
No one could attract attention to an issue quite like Diana. She transformed duty and obligation into a remarkably successful personal calling.
She had a natural affinity with the sick and the young and the old and those who needed care, and it's something which can't be faked.
She will do what she does best, comforting the sick and the dying. In her words, a queen of hearts.
This is okay.
I witnessed on many occasions her presence as a patron, raising millions of pounds for research in a variety of different needy causes.
Diana broke all sorts of moulds by tackling the AIDS crisis. When she became involved in AIDS in the mid-1980s, it was still seen as a gay plague, that it was a disease that could be transmitted by touch.
At that particular time, people talking about AIDS was something that was really shunned her.
Diana did a fantastic thing, and that was shaking their hands. And in an instant, it changed attitudes and rewrote the book about AIDS all over the world.
You can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it.
The royal family didn't like that. I mean, on more than one occasion, she told me that other members of the family said, why can't you do something nice? I.e., what you're doing is not nice.
I remember a meeting she had with the Queen who said, why do you want to get involved in something like that?
She always said, well, look, I have to go where I'm needed, where I'm wanted, and people want me to help out in these issues.
Now, you both like skiing, and yet every year it has become irregular. You don't appear to hit it off exactly eye to eye on the slopes. What is the secret of this?
Don't we?
You two read papers.
But if I can help it. I suspect most husbands and wives find that they often have arguments.
But we don't.
No. But occasionally we do, because I mean,
No, you don't.
I'll go on longer sometimes.
Yes, but I'm faster.
There we are.
The princess would have welcomed reconciliation with Prince Charles, even in the terminal stages of their marriage.
I do know that she did genuinely want that marriage to succeed for herself and, of course, for her two children.
She desperately wanted to make it work.
Camilla never went away.
She was obsessed about this one woman and convinced herself that Camilla had been in the marriage throughout. It was a sort of paranoia.
It was rather sad because there was Diana in the short years of life being criticised or being publicly humiliated by friends of the Prince of Wales and national media saying that she was obsessed, she was paranoid, and even friends of the Queen saying that she was damaged goods. I knew that these were false statements because they were untrue. Because actually Diana was right from day one in 1981.
This was the first picture of them taken in public from 1975. At that time, of course, both were single, each of their divorces many years away.
I remember on one occasion, it was Camilla's sister's 40th birthday, and she and the Prince of Wales went to that birthday party. I think everyone was surprised that even Diana accepted that invitation. There was a certain amount of mischief here, I think, on Diana's part, because she knew that Camilla would be there, but since the invitation was addressed to both of them, I don't think the Prince of Wales expected for one moment that she would attend, but she did. When we arrived at this house, Diana was, you know, stunning as you'd expect. And the door was opened in this room of a number of people. Suddenly, it was like a freeze frame of people whose faces were absolutely stunned that Diana would come to this party knowing full well that the other woman that she talked about was there also. You know, after about an hour or so, my name was being shouted in the corridor. And it was Diana, so I went out and said, you know, what's up? She said, Ken, I can't find the husband or Camilla. So I said, well, what are you going to do? She said, I've got to find them, Ken. And I said, is this a good idea? I said, as if, you know, you always expected something like this would happen. And she said, no, we've got to do it, Ken. I said, well, this isn't my role. This is not for me. She said, no, I want you to be with me. I want you to witness it. Okay, I mean, reluctantly, I did. And we went to this room in the house, and eventually there was the Prince and Camilla sat talking. And Diana just went across and literally went and looked at Camilla and said, don't think I don't know about this. I've known about it since I've been married to the Prince of Wales. And Camilla said something really strange. She said, it's all right for you, Diana. You've got two wonderful boys. And even I had to sort of think, you know, what really was the point of that statement? That was the beginning of the end. And Diana had realised, well, that is the end.
We've recently learned from a new biography of Prince Charles that he was in therapy for 14 years. Now, was that because of his marriage or because of him?
As she strived for personal growth, the princess took refuge in her children and her charities. She also consulted an extensive range of advisors and alternative therapists.
We had the sort of tarot cards, we had the copper pyramid, we had the colonic irrigation.
The only psychic that she saw, she was Rita Rogers. She spoke to every single week, and she saw her at least once a month. She was her medium.
All these people felt that they could read into Diana's future and set her on this course of magnificence.
Some healer that she saw that was strapping fossils to her body. I said, really? I said, so you want this dinosaur energy?
Absolute and total nonsense, which actually did little for Diana personally, except take substantial amounts of money out of her bank account.
When we went through her cupboard of complementary medicines, thousands of pounds worth of stuff that she didn't need. I said, blimey, you've been talked into all this stuff. Don't fall for it.
You know, Diana did this because this is what friends were saying was going to be good for her.
She was really stressed. And she was looking for answers, but she was looking in the wrong places.
I just think it was a bad idea.
Have you tried to change Prince Charles in any way since you got married?
Not at all. I mean, obviously the one or two things, like maybe the odd tie or something, but nothing. Shoes. We won't go any further. But but nothing dramatic.
Diana was very interested in alternative and complementary medicines, much like Prince Charles. It's one of the few things they actually had in common.
She saw Madame Vassaux one time. You know, that was Fergie's psychic. You know, sitting in this, you know, with this pyramid thing.
There was a copper pyramid scientist, you know, and I remember taking her to a property in Belgravia. I dropped her off at this house that was a fire hazard. There were these thousands of candles placed on this stairway. She was taken to the roof and sat underneath this copper pyramid. It was as though a plumber had some excess copper tubing and had made this pyramid out of this copper tubing. And there seemed to me to be some like a milking stool in the middle of it.
The pyramid was because of the energy that's transmitted through a pyramid. Sorry.
The lady, I think whose name was Madame Vassaux, I think, said, oh, Diana would like you to see her under the pyramid. And then I went to the roof, and there's Diana sat on this milking stool under this copper pyramid, and there was a hole in the roof. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh," she said, "I'm letting all the evil spirits go out through the roof." I said, "I think you better come downstairs." And she said, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "Look, ma'am, I'm not laughing at you. I'm just laughing at the situation that we're in." Anyway, we left. And these treatments, I suppose they were often referred to, did die, thankfully.
As she became ever more alienated from the royal family, Diana struck back. In 1995, she gave an explosive television interview in which she took the opportunity to unburden her most deeply felt grievances.
She wanted it to work, but that statement in the Bashir interview that there were 3 of us in this marriage was the sole reason why this was never going to work.
She felt that the way to sort of reach out to people was to speak over the heads of the media, but directly to them through television. My feeling at the time, and I told her, was that this could be potentially damaging.
She was very pleased with what she'd done at the time. She thought it was a great performance and she was thrilled, and she rang up her friends and said, "You must watch, you must watch."
She phoned me up the day after the interview and she said, "Did you watch television last night?" I said, "What did you think?" I said, "You made a real prat out of yourself."
Afterwards, I think she regretted it bitterly.
She was horrified. I said, "Why on earth did this happen?" Martin Bashir was supposed to be doing a programme about your charities. What happened?
Desperate people do desperate things.
He duped her into it because he got her at a weak spot when she was a bit down.
She was hugely criticised by the press and the media and the establishment.
I said, "Who advised you to do this awful thing?" She said, "Well, Fergie and Ruby Wax." I said, "Yeah, the brains of Britain." Oh my God.
I took a very strong line in the paper about her decision to do the Martin Bashir interview and criticised her over it. She wasn't very happy with what I said. Where I think she made a mistake was questioning Charles's suitability to be crowned king, and she later acknowledged that she wished she hadn't said that.
She was completely distraught. And then to compound things, obviously, she got a phone call from Buckingham Palace from the Queen to say, get divorced. That's it. You've got no choice now.
The Queen decided that this tit-for-tat war couldn't go on. The irony is, and this is my main point, is the public loved her even more for it. The public all flocked to her side. Whatever happened, whatever mistakes she made, people still supported her. And I found that quite remarkable.
4 weeks after the explosive Panorama interview was broadcast, the Queen wrote to the couple urging them to divorce.
The initial stages of the divorce was very difficult because they threatened her access to her boys.
He'd agreed a settlement. They had divided up the children so that they could have the children equally.
Diana got the access to the boys. She had 1 weekend in 5, which isn't much, but don't forget they were at boarding school as well.
It must have been tough for her, rattling around in that huge apartment at Kensington Palace when boys were away at boarding school.
The finalisation of the divorce in August 1996 enhanced Diana's sense of liberation. In 11 years, she had transformed into the global epitome of high fashion, elegance, and sophistication.
This was the beginning of a new life for Diana, which of course ultimately led into Diana's giving up protection and leading this independent life, now without a royal title. She said, "At last I'm free." And we know what freedom gives people.
She phoned me up, she said, "Are you watching this on television?" Trevor MacDonald and the monarchy debate, she told everybody, "You've got to phone up. You have to say that you want to abolish the monarchy." It's just because she didn't want Charles to be king. Obviously, William and Harry weren't interested in getting involved until the time came when Trevor MacDonald said, What does the public think about, will Camilla ever be Queen? And Harry picked up, who's Camilla? And then William said, don't you know? Diana said, hold on a minute. Harry, it's time for bed. Come on.
In the year after the divorce, relations between Diana and Charles were once again on an even keel.
Diana and Charles became very friendly after the divorce.
There were flashes of the old Charles and Diana. His helicopter landed at the back of Kensington Palace and he wanted to pop into the palace to use the loo. And he phoned ahead. One of the servants picked up the call and told the princess, and she said, yes, of course he can come in.
We'd be on the phone and she said, oh, I've got to go, my ex he wants to use the toilet.
And then Charles comes out, and as he comes out to get into his car, Diana comes running out and says, same time next week. And of course, the policemen don't know what to look. Charles got red with embarrassment and got into his car, and he did laugh. I mean, they did laugh. I mean, it was a joke, but it was quite a funny one.
They became very, very good friends. That's why Charles was devastated. When she died, he cried his eyes out.
Diana inspired a nation with her compassion and kindness. And in her final years, she would meet the man who, in turn, inspired her.
When she started seeing Hasnat Khan and she'd met her Mr. Wonderful.
She formed a relationship with Hasnat Khan, consultant heart surgeon these days, and at that time, a young doctor, but of Pakistan heritage. So someone entirely different for Diana in that regard.
Like she said, he was the only man in her life that didn't want anything. Even when she offered to pay to repair his exhaust because the car kept backfiring, and we'd be on the phone and she said, can you hear that? I said, that's really embarrassing. She said, do you think we could be arrested for this?
I found a very normal person. A normal person with great qualities, and I think she did a great work for the country and for people all over the world.
Diana was she used to say, we could live in a 3 up, 2 down semi. I said, yes. And pigs are going to fly.
He would have seen it as very tricky to pursue a life with her as her partner and she as his partner. He quite rightly viewed the prospect with some trepidation.
That sort of life could never be, but it's what she wanted.
He didn't think he'd be able to continue carrying on his work as a heart surgeon because she would completely overshadow it, everything they did. There would be no privacy. The only way he felt that they would have a future together would be if she were to move to Pakistan. And that, of course, threw up difficult problems for Diana. She went over there, she met his family to see if she could adjust to life over there. And I don't think she felt she ever could.
She really liked the days she spent here, I think.
There was real love between them, but she and Hasnat had realised that their relationship could not go on, or at least it couldn't be developed in perhaps the way that Diana wanted it to.
He's a heart surgeon. You cannot pin any doctor down.
An unlikely friendship with Dodi Fayed, the son of the controversial owner of Harrods, was the last surprising twist.
Something happened because Diana went public with Dodi Fayed in that last summer of her life, and he was the only man, apart from Charles, who she allowed herself to be seen with in public.
When she went on holiday with Dodi, who wanted to make Hasnat Khan jealous.
Diana had 2 holidays that summer. She went with the boys at the invitation of Muhammad al-Fayed, and they met the Fayed family, but they went back to England and joined their father. Diana then went back and had a second spell in the Mediterranean on the yacht with Dodi.
Here was a man, sophisticated, worldly, cosmopolitan, who had all the toys, if you like, that she was used to, the private jets, the security, the limousines, and of course the endless bank balance, and he could take care of her, and I think she found that enormously attractive.
Shining through the blurry images from the Mediterranean during those last few weeks was a personal joy which Diana made no attempt to conceal.
They could have had a future together. I don't know whether they would have had a future together.
Diana and Dodi knew each other 15 days in total. That's throughout their whole lifetimes, only 15 days.
I spoke to Diana 5 or 6 hours before the tragic accident. She rang me. It was a routine conversation. She was coming back the following day. She was tired. She was ready to get back home. She asked me a lot about what William and Harry had been up to. She was upbeat and happy. She was tired for sure. But yeah, she sounded happy. Definitely. She said she was happy.
Diana, Princess of Wales, pounded to death.
It's you, press, that killed her. You're the scum. Yes. We're here to pick the bones.
The paparazzi and the press and the media are not assassins. Dodi Fayed was obsessed with the media. And instead of, allowing the media to have some part of this by giving them a photograph, he made the fatal mistake of actually sort of fighting against them. They can be invasive, they can be annoying, but the point is, they were never there to kill you.
There was this most awful feeling that this wasn't really happening, that we weren't really telling the nation and indeed the world that Diana was no longer with us.
My sister rang me and she said, "Have you heard the news?" I said, "What news?" She said, "Diana's died." And I said, "Diana who?" And she said, "Princess Diana." I was absolutely devastated.
It was so shocking, and still is.
I didn't want to believe it. It was like, okay, I'm going to wake up from this nightmare.
I felt desperately sorry for her family.
Thank you so much.
It was like a kind of global explosion of shock, which released this extraordinary kind of strange pagan form of mourning.
The British people felt very deeply about Diana. They felt her loss personally.
It was like losing a family member.
It's something about the way she interacted with people. How else can you explain why hundreds of thousands of people turned up in London that week between her death and her funeral? People who didn't know her at all, people who I saw sobbing in the street, bringing flowers. This was someone they didn't know, yet they thought they knew her.
Today, Diana's compassion and influence for good lives on, forever frozen in time.
She had this remarkable star quality that we may never see again.
She made her mark in life as a wonderful ambassador for the UK and for all her charity work she did.
This is something that Diana was always going on about. No one's ever appreciative of my work. She wanted acknowledgement, wanted someone to say, "Hey, thanks, this never happened."
Well, I'd like her to be remembered slightly better than she has been up to now. I feel glad that William and Harry are at last showing some real interest in acknowledging her position in the country by announcing this plan for a statue.
Diana's legacy will always be the boys.
What we see now is that William and Harry are continuing that legacy. Look at the Centrepoint charity that Diana got involved with. William's now patron of that. Harry with Help the Heroes charities and all the sort of work that Diana pioneered in the 80s and 90s. This is part of Diana's legacy. They're doing exactly the same. These two young modern royals that are the direct product of a woman that did change the face, in my view, of the monarchy.